For years, people have wondered, have aliens been secretly visiting Earth for millions of years, guiding our evolution and shaping our civilizations? And has mainstream science been covering it up? The idea of ancient aliens, paleocontact, and hidden extraterrestrial influence is one of the most viral modern myths. But the surprising truth behind it is very different from what most people think. The myth goes like this. Sometime in deep prehistory, maybe even before humans existed, advanced extraterrestrial beings arrived on Earth, modified early life or early humans, and then kept returning across millions of years to steer our DNA, our religions, our empires, and our technology. In this story, aliens are the real authors of the pyramids, the Nazca Lines, the statues of Easter Island, and even parts of our sacred texts. It is a powerful narrative because it makes our past feel like a science fiction movie. And it suggests a hidden history that only a few in the know have uncovered. Here's where it gets interesting. This myth does not come from ancient people themselves. It really takes off in the late 20th century, especially after the space race, when rockets, UFO sightings, and science fiction had already soaked into popular culture. Suddenly, old myths about gods from the sky started being reread through a modern lens, not as symbolic stories about weather, power, or morality, but as literal reports of flying machines and astronauts in spacesuits. That is where misunderstood history and misunderstood science begin to blend into one of the most persistent urban legends in modern media. People believe in this myth for several very human reasons. First, it is emotionally exciting. It turns every stone circle, every temple, every myth into a clue in a cosmic puzzle. Second, it flatters the believer, because if you see the alien connection, you feel like you are in on a secret others are too blind to notice. Third, it offers a simple answer to complex questions. Instead of slowly evolving cultures, trial and error engineering, and generations of workers, you just say, aliens did it. That satisfies the craving for big, cinematic explanations. And finally, there is the enormous unknown. The universe is vast. Life elsewhere seems plausible, and Earth's own deep past is full of gaps. Where there are gaps, imagination rushes in. But this is the part most people never hear. In real science, extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. And so far, the ancient alien hypothesis has not produced that kind of evidence. Supporters of the myth usually point to a familiar set of proofs. They talk about architectural marvels like the Great Pyramids, Machu Picchu, or Stonehenge, and say there is no way primitive people could have built them without help. They show stylized carvings or statues that look, at first glance, like astronauts in helmets. They mention myths of gods descending from the heavens and say those must be literal descriptions of spacecraft and technology. On the surface, this sounds like a neat collection of science facts backing up a wild idea. But when archaeologists, historians, and engineers look closely, the story changes. Real research into these sites shows long, traceable histories of development, earlier, simpler structures, improvements over time, tools and quarries and construction ramps, and even written records of workers and logistics in some cases. Rather than appearing out of nowhere, these achievements sit at the end of a very human chain of trial, failure, and progress. Now, this is where researchers were stunned. Again and again, claims used in TV shows and books to prove alien visitation fall apart under basic checking. The astronaut figures in ancient art, for example, almost always fit into a known religious or symbolic context once you study the culture that made them. The so-called impossibly precise stonework turns out to be reproducible with patience, simple tools, and lots of human labor. The Nazca Lines, visible from hills and not just from the air, can be created with stakes and ropes. In other words, the evidence does not require aliens. It is explained simply by human ingenuity. Here's the twist almost everyone gets wrong. Ancient alien narratives often underestimate ancient humans while overestimating how obvious alien technology would look. If a civilization visited with tech millions of years ahead of us, their machines might not resemble rockets, helmets, or metallic flying discs at all. Those shapes are ours, born from 20th century rocketry and pop culture. When someone in our age looks at a winged god or a stylized mask and immediately says, "spacesuit," that tells us more about our imagination than about the past. This is a classic case of misunderstood history, where we project modern ideas backward onto people who were thinking in completely different symbolic languages. At the midpoint of this myth-busting story, here is the new twist that keeps things interesting. There actually are real scientific ways to test whether something like long-term alien visitation has happened. And they do not depend on carvings or legends. Scientists look for physical traces and usual isotopes, artificial materials locked in very old rock layers, anomalies in the genetic record, or technosignatures in the sky, and so far, Earth's deep record looks exactly like what you would expect from natural processes and biological evolution, not from millions of years of alien tinkering. If aliens had visited repeatedly over geological timescales, building bases, mining resources, or altering the biosphere, they would likely leave unambiguous scars in geology or biology. Real science has become very good at detecting subtle changes across deep time, from asteroid impacts to mass extinctions, yet nothing in those records requires or even suggests extraterrestrial intervention. Here's where it gets interesting again. The more we learn about human evolution and archaeology, the less room there is for mystery builders. Fossils, ancient DNA, and tools show a continuous or branching story from early hominins to modern humans. Stone tools become more refined, symbolic art appears and spreads. Agriculture develops independently in multiple regions, and architectural know-how accumulates step by step. There is no abrupt, unexplained leap that screams alien upgrade. What may feel like a sudden explosion of creativity, like the flourishing of art during the ice age, actually sits on a long foundation of cognitive and cultural development that researchers can trace. But this is the part most people never hear. Ancient alien theories often quietly erase the achievements of real people, especially non-European cultures. When someone says, "there is no way Egyptians, or Andean cultures, or Pacific Islanders could have done this without help," they are not defending science. They are dismissing centuries of cleverness, experimentation, and social organization. Many archaeologists see this as not just bad reasoning, but ethically troubling. It turns colonially biased assumptions about primitive people into a flashy TV-friendly narrative. In an educational video that cares about debunking myths and respecting human history, that hidden bias matters just as much as the lack of evidence. Another key part of the myth involves legends of gods and sky beings. Supporters say, look, these texts literally describe beings descending from the heavens in fiery chariots. What else could they be but aliens? Here's the twist almost everyone gets wrong. Mythic language is symbolic, not journalistic. For ancient cultures, the heavens were not outer space. They were the realm of the divine, the weather, the unknown. Chariots, thunderbirds, wheels of fire, these are poetic ways to describe power, fear, and awe, not technical manuals for spacecraft. When scholars study these myths within their cultural framework, they see deep patterns about morality, kingship, and nature, not secret eyewitness reports of UFOs. To treat them as literal alien diaries is to distort their original meaning. Now, this is where researchers were stunned in a different way. When people actually track the history of ancient alien ideas, they find that many of the mysterious claims are relatively recent inventions. Carvings are redrawn or exaggerated in popular books, photos are miscaptioned, timelines are scrambled, and in some cases, outright hoaxes slip into the story. When experts go back to the original artifacts or sites, the alien parts often vanish. What remains is a sad pattern of fabrication and selective storytelling, a kind of hidden history, but not the one the shows promise. Instead of revealing ancient secrets, it reveals how easily a dramatic narrative can override careful evidence. At the same time, science is genuinely open to the possibility of life beyond Earth. Astrobiologists study extreme environments, from deep ocean vents to Martian analog sites, to understand where life might exist elsewhere. Astronomers search for exoplanets in habitable zones and for technosignature signals that might indicate advanced civilizations. The consensus is not that aliens are impossible, but that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and so far, the evidence for ancient visits just is not there. This is one of those surprising truths. Real science is often far more humble and cautious than TV-style speculation, but in the long run, it gets us closer to reality. The unexpected truth behind the idea that aliens have been visiting Earth for millions of years is this: the universe might indeed be full of life, and it might even include intelligent civilizations. But everything known about our planet's geology, biology, and archaeology points to a story written by Earth itself and by humans, not by secret space visitors. Myth-busting here does not kill the sense of wonder. It redirects it. Instead of giving credit to unseen beings, it restores it to our ancestors, who carved, built, and imagined with the tools they actually had. It reminds us that misunderstood science and misunderstood history can be just as gripping as any urban legend when they are explained simply and honestly. In the end, the most awe-inspiring part is that a small primate species on a tiny planet managed to create pyramids, decode DNA, launch telescopes into space, and ask big questions about its own origins on its own. That is not a disappointment. It is a miracle of a different kind. So, have aliens been visiting Earth for millions of years? As far as all credible evidence shows, no. The visitors in this story are our own fears, hopes, and imagination, projected onto the night sky and then reflected back onto ancient stones. The real mystery now is not who built our past, but what we will do with our future. What myth should I break down next?